Okay, so first, Yeshua, thank you for the safety of the bakery. Thank you for these men. Thank you that they're here. Thank you for this time. I ask Messiah that you would open the ears of our heart. I pray we'd be equipped to change our steps in light of what you were trying to upset and destroy. Give us sight to see what you want to upset and destroy. Give us sight of a God who would stretch his hand out and keep it stretched out. Help us understand who you are, where you're coming from. Help us not to be blind. You've rescued us, Messiah, from going astray like sheep, following our own way. So protect us and raise us up in Yeshua's name, amen. All right. So we talked about. I'm going to be a little bit quicker here. Basically, talked about some Sod readings with how 6 through 8 and up to this point in 9 could even be read as chronologically in order of Matthew. It depicts decisions of Mary and Joseph as depicted in the Gospel of Matthew. And the child that's to be born correlates to Yeshua, and it is also the child that Isaiah sires with the prophetess, and the prophetess names the child. He's called Emmanuel, God with us, or El with us. It's a proper noun. The idea of the Torah and returning to the Torah is spoken of as the light of Israel. We've talked about this nonstop metaphor of those who have eyes but don't see, how idolatry blinds people, how covetousness, which is the source of it, blinds people. And some people are walking around in darkness while others have light, which is a very strange image that opens up this chapter. And we talked about plunder, the name of the child, Meher Shalal Hashbaz, how before there is I think a way to get us in the position to be prepared for 8 is Isaiah is all about Yahweh taking high things and making them low, taking low things and making them high. And one of the things he sets you up for is you have these pagan empires that are really powerful and really, really destructive, and really, really threatening. And Yahweh's solution is to raise up a baby, like a baby to beat it. That's literally kind of what he's doing, a child. And it correlates to what he said in 3 about the orphan, the fatherless. There's even this dynamic that now I'm jumping ahead back again to Matthew. I'll let you know when I flip back and forth, because I really do want to build out what it could have meant in Isaiah's time for Isaiah's people. But jumping out to Matthew, even the suspicion that Yeshua is a bastard, it could be said to be seen in Isaiah. I mean, the word for orphan is associated with this notion of fatherlessness. It's specifically rooted to fatherlessness. And there's so many different layers to Yeshua fulfilling this picture of God taking the high things and making them low in reality, and taking Yeshua, who is made to be a low thing, and making him the highest next to El. Okay. All right. So we were reminded of Midian being destroyed in the book of Judges. We have this language, this theophany language of Yahweh making war. And lo and behold, instead of it suddenly saying, oh, it's Yahweh coming with a sword or something, it's verse 6, a child has been born to us, a son has been given to us. Rulership's on his shoulder. He is miraculous counselor, is probably better. He is mighty God. But again, let's see, make sure that what is 6. Yeah, it's actually a warrior ale. That's the real way to translate it. Again, a proper title. It's weird that they want it. They kind of translate it. Yes, they make the G capital, but I think there's a discomfort in them calling him Ale, which is a name. So they just translate it as though it was Elohim. I think it would be helpful because of the context of Isaiah to translate that as El almost every time that it occurs, a name. So he is coterminous with El. He's called Mighty El, Everlasting Father, and then Prince of Peace. And I gave a background piece that in Isaiah, Shalom has its almost the full extent of its Hebrew flavor, which Shalom is really about wholeness. So the Shlomim, you'll notice that there's an offering that's hard to translate. Some English will call it fellowship offerings, some peace offerings. There's probably other names too. I've heard other names for it. It's a Shlomim, and it's hard to depict. Well, when do I call it that? It's a meal. It's where you sit down and feast. It's like the only offering where the intention of the offering is a feast. And it's a celebration offering. It's associated with vows. Sometimes it's called a free will offering, or sometimes it's called a Thanksgiving offering, because if God got you through some shit, you would sit down and have a feast with him and offer to him. And it's also called a well-being offering. So if you go to the Psalms specifically, you'll see that people who endured sickness, made it out on the other side, will offer God shlomims, which is literally a well-being offering. So I'm giving you kind of a Israelite background, but you're going to find in Isaiah that this is true through parallelism, where shalom shows up. Healing, Rapha, shows up right behind it, even in situations where it doesn't make sense, like political situations. In chapter 3, where there's a dude who's like a young man, all the elders in the land are dead, and they're like, look, he has a cloak, let's make him our leader, right? And he's like, I don't want to lead y'all. He's like, he goes, I don't have balm. And he says, I can't bring peace. I can't heal you. I can't heal this land. Now, Isaiah is playing on the idea that the reason Israel fails politically, even though we're political, I don't want to use it because it's very anachronistic and it'll confuse us. They don't have the divisions we do. But there is this idea of focusing on the earthly in their context and not the spiritual. Isaiah emphasizes sickness as the source of the problem in kingship. It's sickness. And he correlates that sickness to coveting because this is a Deuteronomic work. And he opens with Uzziah, who dies from leprosy and coveting. So this is the problem. And he's gotten to the place where he's talked about in 7, he talked about the northern kingdom, actually with Pekach coming against the southern kingdom. And there was a prophecy of Assyria coming to devour and wipe out the northern kingdom, which chapter 10 is going to describe Assyria in much clearer terms. And it's going to build a case that might help us to know that Assyria is constantly compared to Egypt in Isaiah. So we can now jump into 8. The Lord has sent out a word against Jacob, and it fell on Israel. Okay, fell on Israel. This is a strange, just as a point of interest, and so we understand this. You're almost certain that the word is bad, just because they use the verb nafal. It's not common. When a prophecy or a word or something is revealed, normally it's natan, it's given to him, or chazah, he gazed upon it or saw it, like the mode of reception. The mode of reception for this word is that it falls. Okay? This often this can be a metonymical way for Israelites to describe death, okay, to fall. It's going to be a bad word. So, and all of the people knew it. Now, this is strange. How did all of the people know the word? Because the whole point of Isaiah is nobody knows it. They all have eyes. They have hearts, but they don't know. That's the verb that tends to be associated with it. It's either a word like binah, which is understand, or a word like yada, which is to know. It gets associated with the organ of the heart. So you have these organs, but they're not doing their job. They're supposed to be taking in, and they're not taking in. But somehow he says they know it. All of the people knew it. Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, in pride and arrogance of heart, saying, the bricks have fallen, but we will build it. We will build with dressed stone. The sycamore fig trees were felled, but we will replace them with cedars. Okay. What are they talking about in 10? The bricks have fallen, but we will build with dressed stone. The sycamore fig trees were felled, but we will. So you can imagine that they're going to be talking about massive structures. Yes. Walls, temples, palaces, this kind of thing. And the idea is this is like a middle ground. So the bricks here are middle ground. How do you say this? There's shitty structures, there's really, really nice structures, and there's middle of the road structures, okay? This is a pattern you're gonna see in the way that they think about recovering from problems. It's a way to say it'll be better in the times to come than it was before the problem. It's a kind of brazen-faced approach. So if they're the source of destroying their lives and making life miserable, they are refusing to see their ways as wrong, and they are saying they're receiving what should have been received as chastisement from Yahweh, instead of receiving that with repentance and saying we're going to change the way things were. They are saying the chastisement is now a stepping stone to more of my greatness. This is a very, very brazen approach to Yahweh. So the idea is we'll use this as an opportunity to make ourselves even higher, even bigger, even more glorious. Heavier, absolutely. Heavier and more enduring. Okay, so more enduring. And the idea of a fig tree being replaced with cedars. First off, figs are, so I would say here that this is a reference. You're going to see it in 10. This is a reference to nobles and leaders. And the idea of them being replaced with cedars is, again, permanence, power, greatness. You're going to see that in 10. Leaders and people of, and princes get referred to as thickets of cedars of Lebanon. So Yahweh strengthened the adversaries of Rezin. This is Yahweh. Now we're going to go to Yahweh's response.
Sorry, Justin.
Yeah.
And 10, is the bricks fallen and the sycamore trees felled? Is this like the work of Yahweh? Did he cause that, or no?
No, it's not. This is actually a helpful thing. This is kind of not a sober reading, but I'll give you a hermeneutical kind of interpretation. So what do I do when I see a prophecy happen in my day and age and I see blindness? This is common. There's a common problem. So like today, even if people give words and things start to unravel, God's not the Calvinist God. So he actually allows people to delude themselves and say, well, this is just an opportunity for us to make things better. Okay, so it's actually hard to see, even when the word does fall on people, like today, when God's word falls on a people and things begin to unravel, it doesn't always happen within a day. He lets the process unravel so that they reap what they sow, so that their own works become the mechanism to destroy them. So early on, there's this kind of like momentum problem where a faithful person looks and they're kind of bewildered and they're like, well, when is this shit going to happen? When is this going to take place? He doesn't control their interpretive mechanism. So as it starts to unravel, they will refuse to see it, and they will give a different narrative.
They try to replace it with something better.
Sure, they can't deny the fact that things have fallen, things were felled. This is like the COVID thing, right? They can't deny that. Yeah. Okay, but what they can do is say it had nothing to do with Yahweh.
And put something pretty on it.
Sure, or even say I've been telling, we've got to fix those bricks. We wanted to make things better anyways. This is an opportunity. There's a refusal to abase themselves. There's a refusal to say things were wrong to begin with. And so this kind of narrative, when Yahweh does an activity or a Pele or a wonder in the world to upset, the way of things, when he says, okay, I'm going to let the rock fall on your head, it doesn't mean he's going to control the interpretive mechanism of a people. And that's in keeping with Isaiah's whole point about what a human is. They descend into like, I don't remember if this is this chapter or the end of the last one. Yes, the end of the last one. It's a terrifying picture, and it's actually more of a basis for what people call hell. It definitely is a basis for Gehinnom in the prophets, but chapter 8, verses 19 through 22, you end up with this picture of people who continue in their deceit, literally descending into Sheol in contempt, and like they don't ever. There's never an aha moment. There's this idea that I don't know. I think it's an inclination in all of us, this desire for justice, where we think we have the hope, maybe. I don't know if it comes from a kind of like, fuck you, I want you to know it, or if it comes from like, this is just the way justice should work. I think we have the idea that everybody should have an aha moment.
And Isaiah is perfectly fine depicting people as who are already, their organs are destroyed by leprosy, just letting the disease finish its job. There's never a point with leprosy, for example, that you're like, oh shit, everything, it's all coming back to me now. There's no Celine Dion moment, right? Like you descend.
Is that the same in chapter 5, where they're just kind of like dancing and then they?
Absolutely.
So
That's
it's the same idea that like.
To the very end, they dance into the mouth of Sheol. That's a great image from Isaiah. He is painting all kinds of different pictures to show that there is a notion of far gone, and in Isaiah directly correlates to rejecting Yahweh's voice. But when you reject Yahweh's voice, it is the only compass afforded. Essentially, is what Isaiah would say. It's the only mechanism by which you can see and hear and do these things. And so people just, it never, it's dark.
It never dawns on them.
No. Well, literally, that's a good English idiom. There is no dawn for such people.
Yeah, that's what
Literally what he says. There is no dawn for such people. It's like, and again, for what people is there no dawn? Blind people. Doesn't matter how bright the sun is when it comes up. Oh, look how beautiful that is, buddy. You know, it's like Bartimaeus. Look how pretty that sunrise is. Right.
Feel the difference.
All right. They rejoice. Yeah. That's right. Where are we? Okay, we're in. Okay. So what does Yahweh do? He strengthens the adversaries of Rezin against him. This is a mouthful. Yahweh strengthens the enemies of Rezin against him. Is the him Rezin or is it Israel? I would say it's Israel because of the context. I would say it's Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria. So in verse 11, Yahweh is strengthening Assyria. Well, let's see. So Yahweh strengthened the adversaries of Rezin against him, and he provoked his enemies, Aram from the east, and the Philistines from the west, and they devoured Israel with the whole mouth. He has not turned away his anger in all this, and his hand is still stretched out. Actually, this seems like a past tense thing. This is a past tense narrative, which makes, okay, so this makes sense because earlier in the chapter we heard about Midian, right? And he's going to do this in 10 as well. Isaiah is actually going to refer to a lot of militaristic skirmishes and failures. Isaiah is going to refer to a lot of incursions of empire. It seems maybe to jog their memory. He's going to do it in 10. He mentions even an obscure one in Jabesh Gilead, Saul, this weird incursion of a pagan king trying to make their way into Israel in times past. So I would argue that it seems to me that the events of 11 and 12 are historical remembering, and his hand is stretched out. The idea of Yahweh stretching his hand out in Isaiah is kind of, at times it's referred to something like a snap, or waving is the verb sometimes used for the hand. It's kind of like, or whistling. It's the idea that he is the one he's the one who like unleashes these forces. They do his bidding. And so and still his arm is stretched out is the idea that all this bad shit that's happened to you historically, Yahweh's not done. The people did not turn to the one who struck it. So yeah, this is making more sense. It's actually revealing a longer term narrative than just the events of Isaiah's days. Because Aram ends up being Israel's ally.
Who's
So
the one who struck it? It is Israel, right?
it is Israel. This is times past. Aram was Israel's historical memory.
One isn't Yahweh, because then it says that they did not seek Yahweh.
No. The one that struck is Israel. The one that struck is Israel. So,
The person who is
No,
struck.
who did they not turn to?
okay, you're in
They did not
13.
turn to the one. Who's the one?
Sorry. It's Yahweh.
It is Yahweh.
Yeah, that one's Yahweh. Yahweh's the one who struck Israel.
Okay.
So this is remembering a historical account. And it's kind of strange that they're saying, hey, remember the days where Aram was your enemy? It's one of the reasons it was so bad that Pekach and Aram came together. Rezin is from Aram. Pekach is in the northern tribes. They made a coalition, which is
Rezin was from Damascus, Syria.
Yeah, which is Aram. They're Arameans. Yeah.
Oh,
So yeah, we use the word Syria. It's a modern term. Yeah. So they're Arameans. So they were enemies, which is one of the reasons it was so terrible what they were doing. They used the power of a traditional enemy to come in and take Judeans captive. So it's a terrible betrayal. But he's reminding them of the days where Aram was coming in from the eastern front, and the Philistines were coming in from the west. David essentially like quelled the Philistines in the west. He stayed Aram. Okay, so like in Solomon's day, that became a big problem. Once he started to be disobedient, Aram was a source of great strife for Solomon, even in his lifetime. They weren't able to break his yoke yet, but they already started the rebellion and mutiny in his lifetime so that he could see where it was going. In all this, he's not turned away his anger in all this. This is useful to think of, to depict Yahweh. Again, the word for anger is nose or nostrils. So long of nose, okay, one way to depict that is slow of nostril. Okay, arach is to be long or to lengthen. It can be on a timeline. It can be physical dimensions. So the idea that it takes Yahweh a long time to flare his nostrils is the image that's there. In this instance, he's not turning away his anger, and his hand is still stretched out. The people did not turn to the one who struck it. They did not seek Yahweh of hosts. So Yahweh cut off head and tail from Israel, palm branch and reed in one day. Elders in the respectable are head, and prophets who teach lies are the tail. Okay, so this is going to depict, while it is, let's see. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh, his not turning around, still his hand is stretched out. Yeah. So we're in 14. Let's see here. How does it open up? Yeah. So Yahweh cuts off head and tail from Israel, northern. Again, this is going to be the northern kingdom. He cuts off head and tail from Israel, palm branch and reed in one day. Now, this is a weird depiction. I don't know why palm branch and reed. I don't know why the palm ends up being associated with the elders, nobility, kings, and the reed ends up being associated with prophets. And it's interesting that the prophets are being correlated as the tail. Again, head and tail is a common theme, high and low in Isaiah. It's also Deuteronomic, the head and tail, the highest and the lowest in society. But here the tail is correlated to the prophet. And the elders and the respectable, which the word for, I don't know why they use the word respectable. It's again that verb nasa, which is to lift up. The lifted up ones would be a literal translation, okay? Or the heads could be one way to say it. The princes is sometimes how it's translated here. For some reason, the LEB translates it respectable. The elders and the respectable, the high, literally lifted up ones, okay?
This says lifted up of face.
Huh?
This says lifted up of face.
One lifted up a face.
15?
Yeah.
There's me
The
Israel.
respectable word is one lifted up of face is what it's saying. It's literal.
Yeah. It's nasa upanim, the lifted up of face, sure. So it's the ones who are, yeah,
Down their nose,
sure. They're lifted up of faces. They're also recognized and seen. That's one way to say it too, because of their height. And again, so this is that verb. Nasa is literally a verb that depicts Yahweh's activity. It depicts rebellious Judah and Israel's activity, the lifting themselves up against the one who's already the high and lifted up one. But it will also depict Yahweh's action because he will bring low and Yahweh will lift up those he decides to be lifted up. It's ultimately, it underlines the futility in going against Yahweh, who has the final say on everyone's elevation. You could imagine them equating their elevation with their position of strength, happiness, contentment. God, there's so many different words. So their status, their position, whatever, and Yahweh's the one who ends up deciding it, even if they rebel. So yes, lifted up a face, and the elder. Okay, they're the head. And then the Navi, who's teaching lies, who Hazanav. So that's interesting. They say it in the right order. Prophets who teach lies are the tail. Now, I don't know if they're saying that in this instance, basically all the prophets who are of the Northern Kingdom end up being culpable, basically. And they're saying all of them are the tail, or they're just trying to say specifically those who lie.
This doesn't have anything to do with the curse in Deuteronomy, does it? About making them the head and not the tail? Is he saying that? I mean, is Yahweh cutting off head and tail, saying that like they're like you're nothing? I was gonna make you the head instead of the tail, but now like you're not even either. Like,
Yeah.
you're just nothing.
It does exactly. It speaks to the extent of the devastation.
Yeah, because isn't the contrast like with Judah? There's always a remnant, whether it be a ear,
Yeah.
a tail, something like a stick snatched from a
So
cloud.
why is he? Yeah, I don't. Is this related to the blessing and curses in Deuteronomy or no?
It is. It's creative. So he's allowed to be creative and make a derivative and deviate from it, even while it is the starting point of his allegory or illusion or symbol. Part of what he's saying is the devastation is going to be so utter that head and tail will be wiped out. That's like saying a Shoah. It's a disaster. Okay. But then he's also taking these familiar concepts, and right now he's doing something clever. Is Isaiah a prophet? So he's going to peculiarly excoriate false prophets here. They are the tail. And it's a weird depiction because nobody in culture would say these false prophets are the tail. They're very closely in alliance with kings. They're very wealthy. They're being associated with the elders and respectable for a reason. They're in coalition together. If you think of the traditional rendering of head and tail, you wouldn't think of these false prophets because the wealth is shared and funneled to them. And Isaiah's going to make fun of them later for how they just teach for money and this kind of shit. Okay, so they're not poor. But what he's doing here is he's going to peculiarly attack false prophets. And you'll see why. They're all put together in one term, and the term is a lemma called asher, which is to lead or stride. So that lump of head and tail is actually leaders. It's almost like if you divided the leadership into head and tail. Okay, the leaders of this people were misleading them. Verse 16. So that head and tail are the leaders. They're the ones causing the people to walk, and they're misleading them. If you a better translation of this is the same lemma as what shows up in the famous verse in Isaiah 53:6. Each man like sheep have gone astray. Same lemma. They've been caused to go astray.
They've been misled.
And this it's a conjugation which is called the hefil, which is where a subject causes an object to do the action. The subject is the leadership, and they cause the people to do the action of going astray. Isaiah's blaming them here. Okay, now this is not a full picture. Okay, so it doesn't mean that. That means that it's not the sheep's fault. That's not at all what he is saying. That there is a huge amount of culpability laid at their feet. All right, so the leaders of this people were misleading them, and those who were led were confused. Okay, bala, to be put into confusion, which is a bad term. It's not just
We said swallowed up.
yeah, it can be both. It can be both. So it's a play on words. It's like the throat swallowing. Yeah, I think it's used for when Sheol swallows the dancers in 5. Let's see. I could check
That's a
that.
dark picture.
Mm-hmm. See that they divided here. That's so funny. That's annoying when they do that. Yeah, I'm not going to look that up right now. But it is used for.
The leaders of this people were misleading them, and those who were led were confused or swallowed up.
Yeah. So part of the question is if confusion and swallowed up is a play on words, which I do think it is. Who was doing the swallowing? Sheol is one depiction from 5. Okay, which is death, which is pretty fair. Sheol's pretty fair. Everybody gets devoured by it. But here, it is possible that the leaders are the one who's swallowing them because they're devouring them, they're confusing them, and eating them. Which then it correlates back to the idea of 3 and 4 that the leaders are destroying the widow and the orphan and the weak. Those are the ones who are led to slaughter and cooked in pots. Their flesh is being described as cooked in pots earlier in Isaiah.
It couldn't be Yahweh doing the swallowing.
No, it couldn't because of the parallelism with misleading and confusion. They're two different verbs, but it's a parallelism. So the leaders are squarely responsible. They're the ones causing the confusion.
Gotcha.
Okay, therefore, verse 17, therefore, the Lord, let me get back to my Hebrew here. Why are you doing that shit? Oh, man, come on. It's being weird. Freezing up here. All right. Therefore, the Lord did not rejoice over its young men, and he did not have compassion on its orphans and widows, for everyone was godless and an evildoer, and every mouth was speaking folly. And all this, his anger did not turn away, and still his hand is stretched out. Now, this is interesting because this is almost depicting it like Yahweh's hand being stretched out is correlated to the action of Israel devouring itself, right? Because if Israel is one entity and the leaders are doing this, they're devouring themselves. And he does say that while they are misled, he is saying everyone is godless. Everyone's an evildoer. Everyone's mouth is speaking folly. It does to a degree describe the age and the time. I don't know that I would make it. I wouldn't put too much stress on the idea that the orphans and the widows and the young men are being depicted as evil and godless. That is a possible way to read this, but it's also possible to read this as this is the way that Israel's functioning at the time. Yeah.
This would Psalm 78 have been written by now? This sounds a lot like Psalm 78 in the story of Israel, as far as they kept going their way and the wrath of God was not, and his arm was still stretched out.
It's possible, but the idea of Yahweh stretching his arm out is an ancient one, and the idea of things just getting worse and worse because of Israel's bad behavior is a
Psalm
theme.
78 wouldn't have pulled from Isaiah.
It's possible that either. There are times where there are themes in Isaiah that correlate to multiple Psalms and vice versa, and it would be perfectly fine for a prophet to take Psalms that are associated with the temple or the cult of Yahweh and what they're doing, and to weave them into what he says. Isaiah's issue is he wants to be intelligible. He needs to be understood by his. So he has to do two things. He has to speak in a way that someone who was humble and abased themselves could understand it in his context, and simultaneously he has to layer it in symbol so that they don't understand it. The reason they don't understand it isn't the semantic comport. The semantic comport has to be intelligible. The things he's drawing from would need to be intelligible. Okay, it wouldn't be fair if, for example, the semantic comport was all Mandarin. Right? That doesn't. There's no way for them to access it, even if they were humble. No matter how humble they are, they're not going to be able to access that. And there's also, because of the causal idea of because of the causal role of the leadership and the false prophets. Everyone was godless and evildoer, and then every mouth was speaking folly. There is still a causal blame at the feet of the leadership, because they're the mouths that folly started in, and it spread among the people. So culpability does spread among the people, but it has to do with evil spreading among the people. This makes it even possible to read it as the act of being swallowed is like Sheol, but it's like deception. It's like evil itself. It's like godlessness is devouring the people because of the leadership. Does that make sense? So yes, there would definitely be flavors of the idea that the higher are taking advantage of the lower and devouring them. But then there's also the idea that because the higher gets to initiate the talk of the land, they initiate evil talk, godless chatter and folly, and it spreads. And that swallows them, which again is like sickness language.
So is the beginning of this chapter when he's sending, is Isaiah expounding on the idea of why God is going to send a new leader? Or how do the people that are being led astray repent if the leaders are Like is Isaiah saying, "This is why I'll send a new leader. This is why I'm sending an everlasting Father, like mighty Counselor." Or like, what is?
Yeah. The thing that's okay, so this is attacking. All right, verse 9 lets us know that this word that's going to fall is for the northern kingdom. Ephraim, inhabitants of Samaria, and they're called
Yeah.
Israel and Jacob. The child that's supposed to be born,
Mhm.
we're going to see in 11, is Judean. He's from the house of David.
Yeah.
So Isaiah's son is a prefigure, okay, of a Davidic son.
Yeah.
So the son that's going to be raised up is Judean. So while there is going to be this idea of peace and unification,
Mhm.
because that is Yahweh's intention. You can see that even in 8 when he talks about the days of the division of the house of Israel and Judah.
Mhm.
His desire will be the reunification of Israel, the peace of Israel, but it will be a Judean king. So there's no redemption for the north other than just to return. There's no like rulership that's promised them here, and there's no return back to glory. They're going to have to be devoured, and then refugees will come back in under the covering of a Davidic king. That's what's being cast. So because he's does that make sense? Because he's targeting the northern kingdom with this word. He isn't even saying, "Hey guys, I'm going to raise up a good Israelite king for you." That's a child. No, it's this Judean king. So it's layers deep. Okay. So dark. Backing up a second. This Alchen, this therefore the Lord did not rejoice over its young men, to have compassion on its orphans and widows. When the people are led astray and taught to speak evil and do evil, it makes it's causal here. As a result, Alchen, therefore, as a result, Yahweh doesn't exercise compassion on them. When a people are misled and walk into evil, they no longer become they end up not being the objects of compassion, because it's an evil that's oppressive and destructive. So they're oppressing and destroying each other. Verse 18, for wickedness, Rasha, there's harmfulness. It entails, it's not like not reading your Bible, it's destroying your neighbor. In their context, it's not like not going to the temple or something. It wouldn't be like, in their context, chapter 1. In their context, chapter 1, it's not, wickedness here isn't going to be depicted as, oh, I didn't go to temple, I didn't on Shabbat, and I didn't keep festival. They're going to say wickedness will look like destroying your neighbor. So it burned like fire. It consumed briar and thorn, and it kindled the thickets of the forest, and they swirled upward in a column of smoke. Now, there is this constant metaphor, and I've been wrestling through it, the idea of the thickets of the forest, but it's in this idea of the briar and the thorn. Now, I suspect this is partly what's in view, and because Isaiah has prophesied different time points on a timeline at different places, when that forest is felled, all that will be left is briar and thorn. This is like a kind of early stage undergrowth when a forest is trying to return. Okay, this depiction is saying it will be. So the trees of the forest, the thickets of the forest, are probably the elders and the respectable. He's still talking about the same people, and the briars and thorns of the false prophets. It's that intermediate growth between just flatland and forest. Okay, so when he says in 7, for example, there will be nothing but briar and thorn, and that depicts fake kings, right? It's because there are no cedars, there are no true kings. Does this make sense? That's all there is. Tell me if you're not tracking with me. I can repeat it. Okay. Imagine there's like a
This
plane.
is the same thing that happens in the Book of Judges.
Yes, it's a common.
Right.
It's a
The thorn
common.
bush.
Yes,
Ends up ruling over people.
That's right.
Everything is destroyed. The thorn bush becomes the king, and he ends up being.
Who asked for a king in that parable? In the parable itself, it was the trees of the forest.
Yeah.
So the trees of the forest end up picking not part of the forest to rule them, which is all the more funny because Gideon's son, he's a bastard son, not a bastard, but he's like a demoted son of a Pigla, a concubine, who's not an Israelite woman.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this I didn't know that idea was in the Old Testament. The thorns is is that what Jesus is pulling from when he gives the parable, and when the Pharisees have heard it like that he was calling them the thorns?
No, I don't
The
think so.
seed?
I don't think he's talking about leadership there, partly because when he describes thorns, he describes it within the context of a cultivated field.
Okay.
And it doesn't. Now, it is
Briars
possible.
and thorns,
Yeah,
that's
if you wanted to, you could say the way that the Pharisees could be described as the thorns is in a time where there's a vacuum of a king, all that raises up is thorns, even if it pretends to be boastful. It's nothing but shitty thorns. That could be commentary on the Pharisees, and because they love money and wealth, the third seed that falls on the ground, the thorns are correlated to wealth, choking them out. These are wannabe motherfuckers. That's the idea. They're wannabes because there is no real king in the land. So all you get left with is wannabes, which are equated with thorns.
But it's not necessarily that Jesus was pulling from the Old Testament idea of this.
No, a better way to say it is
Thorns and briars.
Yeshua is pulling from a common semantic concept to his audience. This would be because they're familiar with agrarian agricultural
Yeah.
endeavors.
Yes.
They're familiar with how these processes break down and whatever. So when they would all have a story from either themselves or their uncle or a family member, or whatever. All that time that these thorns came out of nowhere and fucked up this crop or whatever. Okay. But it becomes this metaphor, and the thing I want you guys to grab is because if you could imagine, I want you to imagine there's flat land, and then a forest starts. Okay, the forest becomes a metaphor for great leaders. They are tall. Literally in 10, it will say, people that are tall will be cut down. The tall trees of Lebanon will be cut down with an iron axe. The parallelism is tall people, okay, are being compared to the trees of Lebanon or Lebanon. Up in the northern, like if you were to follow that along the Mediterranean Sea and go up into the area of Lebanon, they had massive trees, okay, huge trees. This became a metaphor all over the ancient Near East for kingship and rulership. So I want you to imagine now we're going to look at it 2D. So imagine this is flat land, okay? And over here are these really high and lofty trees. When the land transitions from flat land to trees, you have briars and thorns. This is typical, right? We would call it undergrowth or something, or it's at the foot or edge of a wooded area, all right? And you'd have to imagine that it's a circle. This is just how biomes work, right? Like it's just they're not parasitic, but they're kind of like they're what you have to go through to get to the trees. Now, if I fell all the trees, those kind of parasitic plants take over, and all it is briar and thorns, right? So 7 is saying there will be no kings at a time, right? No real kings. They'll just be shit fake kings, wannabes. But this is saying it's describing the thickets as the prophets.
Yeah, but 7 is talking to Judah.
It is talking to Judah, but this is a common metaphor. I'm just saying this is
Yeah.
I'm trying to get you guys to understand the metaphor because it showed up in 7, it showed up in 9, it's going to show up in 10. It's gonna pop up again later on. So if you can understand that concept, it'll help you read Isaiah.
Yeah, and again, the thing that's standing out to me is the contrast. There will be thorns in left in 7, but in 9, talking to Israel, they will all be destroyed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this is the idea of the wrath of Yahweh functioning like a fire, and it's saying the destruction is utter. They won't be able to escape. Not the actual kings and not the wannabe puppeteers. False prophets and what we would call a cabinet. Are you familiar with the concept of a cabinet and something like some kind of organized like federal government or centralized government? The idea of a cabinet. This happens all over the world. It's the idea advisors or counselors. False prophets are there. They're nuzzled up nicely. In a typical coup or changeover, the trees are felled, not the thorns. The council is typically kept intact, unless a king is particularly fearful of conspiracy or something like this.
Right.
The cabinet remains intact. Anybody see Game of Thrones? Okay, so
Really good.
so these people try to
Lord, forgive him.
yeah. I mean, and when I say that, I mean not the last season, which is an aberration. So,
Almost as good as Star Wars.
Causes my nostrils cleared and still through all of this. My hand is
I put it up there with Lord of the Rings.
It
was just bad.
Tony in Game of Thrones. Tony treats Game
Yeah.
of Thrones like the worst ex-girlfriend. I just broke my heart. She cannot speak about it
I'm just
without
imagining
being
engineering
with
strikes that Judge are being striked.
Yeah, go watch the
That's
last
actually-
season. It's like
You mean Darth Bates?
That's right. Snopes
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Brand King's Landing.
Wow.
Oh,
Okay.
but I'm still getting the bakery.
All right. So here's another thing that's why would this kind of language be used? Here's another reason. The typical changeover would be that just the trees would be felled. Maybe a king, maybe their sons. Okay. But the advisors and counselors remain intact. Basically, they just have to show fealty, lick the right boots, and you're okay. This is saying the thing that's coming to you will not tolerate any of you, and you will all die. What is the thing that's coming in chapter 10? Assyria. Assyria is known for radical changeovers. Assyria does strange changeovers. Let me give an example. They will go into territories. They will not only attack kings. These terms, the respectable and elders, Assyrian divisions, okay, militaristic divisions will go to a locale. They will take over the area, and they will specifically get kings and all the elders and nobility, take them out of the city and impale them from their asshole through their mouth. Or they will flail them and take all of their skin off. They will, then they will behead them.
Flay them.
Sorry, flay them.
Flay.
Okay,
I immediately thought of a chain with that.
sorry, flay. Yeah, they'll flay them.
I imagine.
Which is all of these things that they do, they keep them alive for. They keep them alive for. And they do it in front of the town. They don't do it in private, and it's not necessarily, and they do it for their gods. This is, I've said this multiple times, and it's worth remembering for Assyria. Every polytheistic nation in their pantheon, okay, would likely have some kind of militaristic god or goddess, but they would be typically demoted in terms of stature and in terms of who is the chief. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
The chief gods are typically they're spoken of in paternalistic terms
Higher
or
than
or about
wars.
agriculture, these kinds of
Yeah.
things, or fertility. Not in Assyria. In Assyria, their gods are militaristic. Their temples are overlaid not with fruits and pomegranates and fertility. They have depictions of ancient kings gutting people, spilling their intestines, impaling them from the asshole through the mouth. This is a people that is super, super bellicose, meaning they only want war and strife. And part of the way they do this is 10 will reveal this. So I'm jumping to 10. Assyria is depicted as saying, God says you're the rod of my anger, and I'm going to use you to stomp people like mud in the streets, but you're supposed to leave. You're supposed to do your thing, subjugate, and get the fuck out. But that's not Assyria's plan.
Holy shit! So he's just using them. I mean, like they're doing them still.
Who?
So the Assyrians.
Beyond that.
It's all choice.
Beyond that, let's look at it in light of Deuteronomy. This is really interesting. Not only are they doing themselves, do you know the prohibition to not hybridize your seed or your
Yeah.
animals? It's also not your peoples. All these things are intact. It has to do with the seventh commandment and the idea of identity and tribal identity, really. Okay? What does Assyria do? They specifically destroy tribalism on purpose. They attack all leadership. They literally take people and deport them. They don't take them to Assyria. It's a brilliant strategy. And by the way, I'm going to give you a Sod reading. When you get to 10, be on the lookout for the king of Assyria as a prototype of Hasatan. I think that 11 could give us a peephole into how the ancients would have thought, how did Hasatan or Beelzebub become the prince of these sons of God? Okay, and here's what ends up happening. The king says to himself in 10, it's not in his mind. He's going to go further. What he does is he kills elders. So he takes the top of the people, locks them off, takes these people, does not take them to his own homeland, takes them and puts them in another homeland somewhere in the Middle East, has them interbreed with each other with no leadership, so that their tribal identity is destroyed,
Whoa.
their cultic identity with their gods is destroyed. All they are left with is fealty to Assyria and his gods. This is a strange, nobody else does this. On the contrary, when Babylon comes, they allow people some measure of freedom compared to the Assyrians, but they will make you worship the king in addition to your other gods, right? So they're somewhere in between, and the Persians are the most lax. The Persians will say, worship who you want to worship, but make sure you do offerings for the Persian king, kind of deal.
don't the Babylonians do it when you start fucking up, right? They do it as a punishment.
What's that?
Send your nobles and shit out of the way.
No. Hear what I'm saying. They don't send the nobles out. Assyria kills the nobles in front of you and then just sends the underlings out.
Yeah, I'm saying, but the Babylon will do it, but
Babylonians.
as a response to revolts and shit.
Yeah, they will, but even they
Assyria's just the practice.
in Babylon, but even Babylon, when you fuck up and make mistakes, they still will take nobility prisoner and take care of them.
Yeah.
Kind of deal. And yes, Assyria would do that on a scale because they have political ambitions and this kind of thing, but they are peculiar. And this is partly what Isaiah is saying. You will not go back to what he says. Who are the people saying, oh, we'll rebuild with this and we'll do this and whatever? In their mind, it's kind of like business as usual. There might be some kind of upset, but this will be business as usual. Assyria is nothing but. They are a fire that destroys everything. So it consumes the thickets of the forest, and they swirled upward in a column of smoke. Interesting. Geut, this word, the column, the word used for column, is the word used for the kings talking about themselves, and it's when Yahweh talks about themselves. It's related to this idea of gavah, or to grow high. It can literally be turned into the word for a hill. So he's like, oh, you guys want to be tall and high? I'll tell you how I make your area really high and exalt it. A really high hill of smoke. Because that's how big the fucking fire will be. You finally get what you want. You're high and lifted up. It's a parody. So they swirl upward, right? Yeah. They swirl upward in a column or a really high hill of smoke. If you can imagine a hill as this is what kings would do, they would pack and make their own hills, or your temple is like a cosmic hill kind of deal. It's like, I'll make you into a really high exalted hill or mountain, a mountain of smoke. Okay, 19. The land was burned through the wrath of Yahweh of hosts, and the people became like fire fuel. Okay.
Love you, man.
So peace.
We got jacket.
We need shoes.
Oh yeah, your jacket nog.
Bye, Michael.
Sick.
Check out a place. I'll go with you.
Praying for this since I was 5.
Okay, so the word for fire fuel is actually ma'acholet, which is like food or feed, fire feed. So the people or the entire nation just become what do you call this word? Not a conflagrant. There's a word for it. They just an incendiary. That's all. They just become the thing that keeps the fire going. They don't quell it. They accentuate it and cause it to burn up. The land and the people become seen as they have a parallelistic relationship. Love you, man. And they're used as metaphors for each other. Again, go back to Deuteronomy. Why? This idea of the land being destroyed along with the people in fire in the wrath of Yahweh is because of their abandonment of Torah.
Yeah.
People had no compassion toward each other. Okay.
It'll be hard to even sell them as slaves according to Deuteronomy.
Yeah, exactly.
No one will even buy you.
They'll go at the end, exactly. So this is the peculiar. This is as a side point. The proof that Israel belongs to Yahweh is not only located in the blessing.
Right.
The proof that Israel belongs to Yahweh is also located in the curse. This is similar to a concept that we have throughout Scripture. I don't discipline a stranger. I discipline those I love. I discipline my sons. The severe and terrifying discipline of Israel is a result of a covenant they made with Yahweh, and it proves that they are a people that's loved by Yahweh, as bizarre as that sounds. And so we get to the place where people had no compassion toward each other. Now the question is, they don't, and really the idea here is it's not compassion that, see, they translate this word compassion, but why do they say, yeah, they do say I'm gonna look at 19 because I don't know why they translate that what let me hear another version for 19.
The land was burned.
Scorched. Yeah.
Okay, scourge, keep going. Somebody read the whole thing.
By the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and the people are like fuel for the fire.
Yeah.
No one has compassion on his brother.
No one spares
Okay.
No one spares another.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why 19 translates this way. Now, here's what's funny in the Hebrew. You hear the word Aish and the word Ish.
Yeah.
Okay. Aish means fire. Ish means people or man. Aish is Ish. So it's like a planet, like the Ish becomes Aish. The people become fire. And nobody pities his brother. It shouldn't be compassion there. The word should be spare or pity. It's not racham, it's chamal. So they do not spare or pity their brother.
Yeah.
They devour on the right, but still were hungry. They devoured on the left, but they were not satisfied. Yee. This is
political system.
yeah. There is this way too that so there's this added layer. Up to this point, you know that it's going to be a foreign incursion that kicks all this off. But 20 now depicts it as though Israel is devouring itself, which is good to say that the confusion is swallowing. And it is good to say that the head and the tail are eating their limbs. Okay, and they're killing each other. They spread their lies and their deceit. And what is the result? No one spares or pities his brother. This is related to 3, by the way. When Yahweh says, I'll just take away water. And by taking away water, all these events, this chain reaction gets set up, and the people destroy themselves and fulfill the curse of Deuteronomy. Okay, because you made this mess. And now when it falls down, exactly what you were putting on the people beneath you will come back to you as a kind of structural reality. It's an equal and resultant reaction. So you now have, this insatiability. Insatiability and hunger is definitely correlated to coveting. They devoured on the right, but still were not hungry. Devoured on the left, and they still were not satisfied. Each one devoured the flesh of his arm. This too is Deuteronomic. It's depicting the result of a militaristic incursion, the breakdown of society, and siege and famine kind of deal.
It's not leprosy.
No, it would be, you could describe, now he does describe it as a fire that spreads, and he does describe evil as spreading, like gangrene, okay, from the mouth.
Are they saying like they devoured the flesh of one another's arms as like a backwards way of saying, like rather than extend the arm of brotherhood or something?
No, it doesn't. This is self. This is not their brother's arm. It transitions from
His own arm.
people don't pity their own brother to they're killing everyone around them and still not satisfied, so I'll kill myself. I'm eating my brothers, not satisfied.
Gotcha.
I'll eat my own fucking arm. This is, that's the picture. Now you could say, I would say that there is a picture of leprosy somewhere in there because it's the idea of spreading. And it's funny that he uses the word lips and mouth and puts it at the feet of the false prophets. Because that is why they would cover their mouth.
Yeah.
They had some kind of belief that it came from, they probably had some kind of belief that leprosy was airborne or something like this, or spittle related. Probably spittle, because when Yahweh spits on Miriam, or when Yahweh makes Miriam have leprosy, he compares it to a father spitting in the face of a daughter. And they associate
Afterwards, he says she'll bear the shame for a day or whatever.
And he uses this comparable scenario, and you're like, well, how the fuck is that comparable? Well, one of the reasons it could be comparable is the practice of lepers is they must cover their mouth and say unclean, unclean. And so it is possible that they think that it's spittle that carries it, which they would associate the mouth with unclean. This becomes a mechanism for leprosy in a spiritual sense, the mouth.
Well, coveting is most correlated to leprosy, right?
Yes.
Is he saying that like your coveting is first killing? Like with your coveting, you're killing everyone around you, and then once they're infected or dead, you just begin to kill yourself.
Sure, that's one way to read it. You could say that it's there are a lot of ways to layer this, and I would not put it past Isaiah to be aware of multiple layers. Again, these guys think heavily. He will seal up this prophecy. It's going to have a central role. This scroll, as small as it is, guys, just listening to the master, just listening to God and saying what he tells you to say and keeping tabs on it and having a faithful testimony. You never know that it could be swept up and employed in some incredible way. Okay, it is very likely that Isaiah died at the hands of an unclean king, so he met an untimely end. But his life's work, ends up being a huge tool an instrument. His life's work ends up being a massive instrument for God to literally recreate the cosmos. So a guy who was faithful to listen to Yahweh of hosts speak, say what he said, think on it, carefully repeat himself, and try to spread this message and seal up this message and keep this message. Something as small, like a lot of people were doing this and we don't have their message, but Isaiah has become the backbone of the new creation in a way, or at least the story of the new creation. So yeah, we have this. I wouldn't put it past him. I won't say this can't be correlated to leprosy.
Gotcha.
So each one devours the flesh of his arm. Manasseh devoured Ephraim and Manasseh. Now this is interesting because this is probably a reference to a degree to Pekach. He has a weird relationship with the Gileadites, which are seen as the descendants of Manasseh.
Yeah.
Pekach is the bad guy king from the north, who,
He's in season 3.
yeah,
What's his English name?
Pekah.
P-E-K-A.
You said it country a few weeks ago. Pekah, something like that.
Pekah.
Yeah, P-E-K-A-H.
Pekah. I'm just kidding.
I'm sure. Right there. Pecan.
Pecan.
No, he can't.
And pecan. It's pecan.
So
Turn ISIS into what it was.
okay, and now here's what's interesting. When did Manasseh devour Ephraim? At what point historically? In recent times on Isaiah's day. Pekach, when he takes over, he's in the. So if you imagine the Jordan River, Manasseh is a weird territory, right? So over here in the west, you have Samaria. With Ephraim, and then Ephraim starts Manasseh, and Manasseh is divided by the Jordan.
Right.
It's almost entirely like separated by the land. It's not what's the non-contiguous. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in the east, they kind of develop their own culture. They get associated with a tribal head called Gilead. So the degree that descendants will be called Gileadites, and they're in Manasseh. Well, over here in the west, we have Pekachiah, whose father is Menachem. Right, and he killed somebody to get in power, and he's trying to raise his son up. Right, it's confusing because their names are similar. Pekachiah, and then you have Pekach over here in the east. Pekach in the east is a bastard. He's got raiders and people who are lousy people, but a lot of them are Gileadites. Okay, and he has them on his side. He assassinates. Okay, Pekach assassinates Pekachiah, the son of Menachem. Okay, and that's how he gets kingship. This is literally, in recent times, Manasseh devouring Ephraim. And their response in trying to stop it, because they were at war for a while. So this back and forth is them trying to devour each other. So we have this added layer that they're at war within, not sparing each other. And then they turn on Judah. And the same thing happens. Now, here's the end of 21 is terrifying. In all of this, his anger has not turned away, and still his hand is stretched out.
I still don't understand how to read that.
What?
It doesn't sound like the way he's describing the scene.
Who?
The way that Isaiah is describing the scene of Israel, it doesn't sound like his anger should turn on. You see what I mean? So I'm still not understanding how to read.
Oh, because you're reading in light of Deuteronomy. You're reading it in light of the suffering of widows and orphans. Okay.
Okay.
Think of this. We think of we're like, oh yeah, bad widows and orphans, and that's all we think of. We think of it primarily emotionally, right?
Yeah.
How do you think of it? Okay, if you hear, I'm going to test something because I
If
think
you hear the phrase widows and orphans, you primarily think that's a bad thing. It's like a bad connotation.
no. I mean this. Let me try to say this more clearly. It's my fault. I'm the one trying to say this. So, Wes, I have a theory. So I'll just give my hypothesis. My theory is that because we are so wealthy and so secure, when we hear that widows and orphans die, in light of our Western culture that has an affinity for individualization, romanticism, these kinds of things, we think, oh, we're primarily hearing that in the lens of, oh man, that's bad because they should receive compassion.
You should have parents.
This is thousands of years of Christendom that's conditioned us for this.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion and pity are seen as vices in most ancient cultures. Okay, they're not good things. When even the Greeks, who are much more middle of the road than some Middle Eastern people, they see pity and compassion as vices. Some philosophers argue as to why mercy and these things are weak. They're vices. They're not virtues. So here's what I want you to hear: like bad,
Oh.
like destructive, like corrosive to a society. Okay, so watch this though.
So we're not supposed to think about that.
If you are an ancient and you hear this, what should
Compassion's not a gift.
let's imagine people who don't think of it the way you do. Why is it still bad news that the widows and the orphans are being destroyed? The destruction is so full. Okay, one way to read this is the destruction that's coming is so wholesale that it wipes out people that are normally the untouched. The people who are like, if the briars and thorn bushes don't, if these guys,
Because they wouldn't normally mess with the poor in the
who
land.
gives a fuck?
Yeah.
The poor or the cogs and gears at the bottom that pass the wealth up the hill.
Well, they're gonna die anyway. Why?
Yeah.
Why spend time?
So the one way to see this is so wholesale. This destruction is so intense that everybody gets caught up in the conflagration. Everybody's burned up. And
So he's
consumed.
almost
Like the
like,
mouth
so he's
is
like
wider.
saying in all of this, his anger hasn't
Could
turned
say
away. And still his hand is stretched out is like a recapitulation of the same concept.
Yeah, it's the idea that imagine this. Imagine the hand turned up, Tony, and you imagine fire. This is going to be weird, but you imagine that the hand out increases heat. Okay, and their expectation would be okay. Heat. Imagine a hill in heat. Hands right here. Which is closest? In their ancient conception, the hill is closest to God, right?
Mm.
Leadership is closest to the heavens.
Yeah.
So the hand is stretched out. Heat is coming down. Okay. You would expect just the top trees, the leaders, to die, and then he removes his hand. But still, his hand is stretched out. It burns up the briars and the thorn bushes. You think, okay, well, maybe now and stop.
So he
Still, his hand is
uses
stretched out.
hand is stretched out for compassion too. In
Yeah,
other places
that's
in
what I was
Scripture.
gonna ask.
He literally says, "I'm extending my hand, my right arm."
In Isaiah, he says,
salvation
"My
to you."
own right hand achieves salvation." So
That's
what is
different.
this?
This is the word yad and hand stretched out. You're going to see this. This phrase is, they don't use the verb for nuf, which is to go back and forth, but this is him using his hand as the overseeing initiator of the shit. Okay, he's the the causal link to how did all the shit? What was the start of the storm? Yahweh extended his hand. And there's even one instance earlier that we read. I cannot remember the chapter, but the same word that's used for, remember the temple shaking, going back and forth? His hand waves like this.
And shakes the temple. back and
No,
forth.
no. It's the same verb for the temple shaking as the
Okay,
same
gotcha.
verb for his hand, which is to wave back and forth. It's like he's signaling. So his hand stretched out to a degree has to do with what is the heat? What is the fire? What is the source of it? It's Assyria. It's these other nations. So his hand being stretched out as they would be like saying, when are you going to pull them back? When are you going to rein them in? And he's like, I'm
And
not.
also, I just want to understand, in this case, when you say his hand is straight or is upraised, is it another way saying, say, he is striking or something like that? Or
No, that's a good point. So no, it's not outstretched in the sense that he is striking.
uh,
It is literally stretched out in the sense that he's directing the strikers. And actually, that's a very good question, because when you get into 10, what is Assyria called? Yahweh's axe. Yahweh's staff. He's not the one doing it. Assyria's the one doing it, but he's the one that's supposed to direct Assyria. And you're going to end up with this funny metaphor, which I love in 10, where he's going to say that the axe has a will of its own, and it doesn't listen to the one wielding it. And it's like a club that tries. It says, "Does a club lift up its striker? Right? Does a staff lift up the guy who's supposed to walk with it?" It's an absurd picture, right? It's like what Lolo said. Our Lolo, who's Lolo's dad, came and visited us years ago, and one of his first times being around us, and he got to be around Tony, and our Lolo was old, and he was so sweet. It was just like he was very old at that point and small. And he was sitting in a chair at the table, and Tony kind of rushed into the kitchen. Someone was his dad cooking, something like this, sausage. Tony didn't see that it came right out of the fryer. Dad was like, thrown into the left, and Tony just comes in, grabs the sausage, and throws it in, and eats it, and he's fine. But our Lolo was like, ooh, this is very Filipino humor. He goes, ooh, Tony burned the sausage. The sausage goes, ah, ah, ah. It's this reversal. It's this absurdity. So it's like, then Yahweh's going to make fun of the club. Like, what the? Are you lifting me? Like, how does this work? Kind of deal. So the idea is, yes, his hand being stretched out. He's not the one striking. In a way, he is, because he's the wielder, right? But Isaiah will go back and forth in terms of how to see that. And it rarely does he say, he'll say it in other places. Okay, he will. Typically, though, when Yahweh is just depicted as striking other nations, he tends to be depicted as the one doing it to the benefit of Israel. But we do have here Elisha earlier on. He says the one who struck them. So Yahweh is still depicted as the one striking. There's back and forth. They don't want you to see it as. They want you to see it in layers. They don't want you to feel like Yahweh is literally the personification, the one going through. Hey, okay, I'm going to hit you.
It's so crazy because he doesn't need to. He uses a serious free will. He's pretty much like, I have these other people over here who already can't stop from doing this shit, so I'm just gonna not hold it back.
Yeah.
But if you think about it too, you think about what, like, if he is enthroned, right? We keep having this picture of like enthronement. If he's enthroned, when does a king stretch out his hand? Is to direct subjects.
Yeah.
It's like I'm like directing the thing, right? And
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
almost like allowing the thing.
When his hand, you also can imagine this. You think this happened with Persia. Okay, but I'm sure that it's the same thing the Proverbs tell about a king. When your hand is stretched out, is there when a king stretches his hand out, there is going to be chiefly anticipation.
Yeah.
What is he going to say? The Proverbs will warn you about a king's wrath. Why? There's no court of appeals.
Yeah, there's no one
Because
higher.
the judgments of the king are inscrutable because only God knows the mind of the king.
Sure, which one of the ways that an ancient would say they're inscrutable is because there is no appeal process. There's no way to assess the decision. Top dog, he made the decision. It's done. You pissed him off.
Yeah.
There's no one to appeal to. You're fucked. Okay, so guard your mouth when you're around a dude like that who holds in his hand the power of life and death.
Yeah.
So what happens if he holds in his hand the power of life and death and he stretches out his hand toward you? You better hold your breath. Anticipate. What is he saying? What is he going to say? What is he going to do? So yeah, absolutely, it's correlated to the idea of him functioning as a king. I also think with the waving of the hand, it's correlated with a shepherd. Kings are shepherds, okay, and they're sending in animals. The animal metaphor is huge in Isaiah. Pagan animals or pagan nations are depicted as unclean animals typically. But you can imagine that when it goes back and forth between the rod imagery, and sending in nations, sometimes the rod in the shepherd's hand and the king's hand is another nation. Okay. Other times the nations are other animals being directed, kind of deal. And it's weird because Yahweh. This would help. This might actually help. I'm glad this got brought up because
Pharaoh has both a rod and a staff.
sure. So too would an ancient oxen driver kind of deal.
Mhm.
So the thing I want to highlight is there are certain subset of animals that are given to Adam, and they're called chaya hasare, something like this. The living creatures of the field, which we would call not even just cattle.
That's what it's called. Like it's usually translated in when you read it in Genesis. It's usually translated cattle. Like,
sometimes
yeah,
that's bohemah.
Oh, okay.
So bohemah is in Genesis as well, but this phrase, the animals of the field, it means domesticated animals, right? Domesticated animals, and that's who he names. Adam does not name all the animals. That's like a made up. Like he doesn't name all the creatures.
Yes, he did,
Okay.
Josh. He was the first human.
So he names, and this is also Baal, the idea of mastership. The owner name, which is why a wife naming a son is bizarre in their culture because the father owns the child.
Tell me about it.
Okay, so here's what happens. You name the things you direct. You name the things you direct. I'll say it this way. You name the things you wield the rod over. Okay? Do you get to direct bees? No. Flies?
Right.
No. You can't control these. Yahweh does, though.
Well, it's because they don't come when called by.
Sure.
I
So-
prayed once and Yahweh directed the flat for me.
And that's still Yahweh doing it. So if Yahweh...
It's pretty close.
Was the lightning ask you where it should strike?
So here's the point. Their job of having the purview of their rulership is confined to the domesticated animals, but Yahweh's in control of all the animals, right?
Yeah.
Tracking?
Yes.
I know we're getting close to 7. All right. We're tracking now.
Yeah.
In the same way, okay?
It's the smoking color.
Sleep.
All right, so their purview is the domesticated animals. Yahweh's purview is all the animals. From Israel's perspective, this will show that Yahweh is actually the one who calls the shots in the nations. But there's a tension there. This is why it's very helpful for Isaiah to pull in the contemporaneous storyline of Baal and El. And the tension is going to be seen in the next chapter, because Assyria doesn't just reckon that he can beat the other kings. Assyria reckons he can beat the gods that lie behind those thrones as well. And he will literally state that in chapter 10. So this becomes a metaphor for the expansion of a dark king who has evil powers backing him. And it'll actually end up being the mechanism by which Yahweh can wrest control back. So it is the start of a shift to Yahweh inheriting the nations through disinheriting this one who disinherits other nations, which becomes a pretty damn good picture of Hasatan, right? Because we have this weird idea where it's Yahweh, then it's the sons of God given rulership, then there's a figure that somehow ends up at the top of the food chain, and then Yahweh takes it from that figure.
The Psalms say that Yahweh provides food for the lions, and the lions would never be considered domesticated; they'd be considered wild animals.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting that if he provides food for lions, that he would also direct things as well as the Assyrians or whatever else.
Yeah, and when we get to 11, you're going to see when you have the famous. It's in 11 and in 65, but you get this famous idea of predatorial animals dwelling with herbivores in peace, right?
Yeah.
All predatorial animals are unclean because they eat life. You can't eat an animal that eats another animal. So all these unclean animals, huh?
That's why we can't humans.
That's one of the
Wait,
reasons.
we
Sure.
In our church.
Wait, what the fuck?
In your church, within a church, you could find a way out. This is partly why those predatorial animals are unclean empire nations, not just unclean nations, but nations of empire, nations of militaristic strife. Remember earlier in this chapter, these other nations are the cause of war and blood-soaked garments, and they get burned up. Yahweh's going to burn them up. So there's a negative critique on nations that try to expand and devour each other, but Yahweh uses them. I would argue that Yahweh uses them to simultaneously chastise his people and teach justice to the nations, but also wrest control and reconsolidate more and more control. It's one of the ways that he is expanding his reach.
I guess you wouldn't eat vegans though.
You wouldn't eat vegans?
Yeah, you could, because they don't eat life. They don't eat animals.
Interesting. I wonder if you can eat a female animal that's clean, that's menstruating.
That'd be an interesting question.
If we're supposed to consider the flowers of the field, then how can
Don't
we?
inform my conscience.
No, they're just
Don't inform my conscience. I love. Sorry, what?
Well, I was asking if we're supposed to consider the flowers of the field, how
Pork.
Yahweh takes care of them,
I
and then
didn't
don't do anything
ask.
for
I
them.
did
How
not
can we
ask
eat
any
vegans?
questions. I eat what I eat.
You can eat flowers, man. Just go through and eat the prettiest flower that you want.
You just can't eat the burnt flour that's in the bakery.
Okay, so that's Isaiah 9. That's Isaiah 9. Are we done?
Too soon? Yeah.
We're done? Okay, sweet.
What do you guys do?
Oh, God.
I am a little bit of that.